Okay, so we're going to jump into Daniel chapter 7 again. And now I'm going to make a disclaimer. This is not going to be as long of a lesson as the other weeks. That may be a good thing, maybe a bad thing. But the reason is I want to get to the other beasts 2, 3, and 4 that are in here. But I want to take some time next week to get in depth on the little horn and the throne. So I just felt like it'd be better to do 2 short lessons out of that than one lesson, and maybe lose everybody's attention and not get to spend as much time on that, because we'll be jumping once again. We'll jump back and forth into Revelation a little bit when we do that. So I'm going to go ahead, just because I feel like it's a good thing to have everything in context. Bear with me. I'm going to read the 28 verses in chapter 7 real quick. Becky just looked at me like I'd killed her. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to read the prophecy about the beast, and I'm going to read what the interpretation says about the beast. We're going to skip around the throne room scene and some of the stuff, but we're just going to read what the prophecy says about itself here of what we're going to cover. So we're going to start. Last week we covered the first beast, which was Babylon. It was the kingdom of Babylon. And keep in mind that in the first week and second week, we had notes on when these empires actually began and ended. So if you need to go back and look, or if you lose your notes, just let me know and I'll give you another copy of the notes for those weeks. So we're going to pick up in verse 5, and it says, "Suddenly another beast appeared, a second one that looked like a bear. It was raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up, gorge yourself on flesh.' After this, while I was watching, suddenly another beast appeared, and it was like a leopard, with 4 wings of a bird on its back, and had 4 heads, and it was given dominion. And after this, while I was watching in the night visions, suddenly a 4th beast appeared, frightening and dreadful, and incredibly strong, with large iron teeth. It devoured and crushed, and it trampled with its feet whatever was left. It was different from all the beasts before it, and it had 10 horns. While I was considering the horns, suddenly another horn, a little one, came up from among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. And suddenly in this horn there were eyes like human eyes of a human, and a mouth that was speaking arrogantly." Now, don't think that I'm going to be skipping over verses 9 through 14, because they are actually some of the most important verses in this whole thing. We don't ever want to forget that this whole book is actually about the Son of Man that is mentioned in those. But that's the reason why we're just hitting these 3 beasts this week, so that we can next week spend more time on that. But we're going to pick up again here in verse 15. It says, "As for me, Daniel, my spirit was deeply distressed within me, and the visions of my mind terrified me. I approached one of those who were standing by and asked him to clarify all this. So he let me know the interpretation of these things. These huge beasts, 4 in number, are 4 kings who will rise from the earth. But the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to be clear about the 4th beast, the one that was different from all the others, extremely terrifying, with iron teeth and bronze claws, devouring and crushing and trampling with its feet whatever it was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns that was on its head, and about the other horn that had come up, which before which 3 fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly and that looked bigger than the others. As I was watching, the horn waged war against the holy ones and was prevailing over them, until the Ancient of Days arrived, and a judgment was given in favor of the holy ones of the Most High, for the time had come, and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom." So it says the 4th beast will be on the 4th kingdom of the earth, different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, crush it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. Another king, different from the previous ones, will rise after them and subdue 3 kings. He will speak words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will intend to change the religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for times and a half time. But the court will convene, his dominion will be taken away, to be completely destroyed forever. The kingdom, the dominion, and the greatness of the kingdom under all of heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts terrified me greatly, and my face turned pale, but I kept this matter to myself." So Isn't it amazing that we get a really in-depth description? And the longer we go on in Daniel, we're going to learn more and more and more about these beasts. Like I said last week, this chapter basically takes the 4 parts of the statue that we heard about last week and just builds on them. So last week was beast number 1, it was Babylon. Beast number 2, you can there's notes in there about where you can read more about it in Daniel. So this beast is the Medo-Persian Empire. And as we stated previously, this empire started off more as a confederation between 2 huge nations. The Persians were more powerful of the 2, even though Darius the Mede, we read in Daniel, rules over Babylon. And you would think that the more powerful would rule in Babylon since it was such an extravagant city. But Cyrus was the other ruler, and he decided not to rule it in Babylon, but to stay in his home kingdom. So Darius the Mede rules over the western end of the empire, but the greater power is actually the Persians. So when we see this huge bear come out in this vision, and he's kind of cocked up, one side's bigger than the other, kind of like a weightlifter who's got a right arm that's really big and the left arm's not quite as big. That's kind of what we see here in this bear. One side's bigger, more powerful than the other. So the Persians are the more powerful side. But they were just a confederation. So there's a good reason for that. Instead of merging and becoming one country, you'll see that if you look at history, there are lots of places where empires get too large. That's basically what happened to the Roman Empire. They spread out, they got too large. Even though they had a great road system, they couldn't defend themselves. They couldn't get supplies to their army. So with the Medes and the Persians joining together, that gives them 2 governing bodies. And it allows them to more effectively rule the territory rather than trying to come under one government and do it. I'm a guy that likes to talk about small government, but apparently more government worked for them, and it worked pretty well. The 3 ribs in its mouth it sounds kind of funny, but I can't help but think every time that I read this prophecy, I think about the 3 ribs. I think about barbecue sauce dripping off the end of them. But that's just me. Don't let a chubby guy teach prophecy and with ribs in it, not think about barbecue. So anyway, when we see that, my wife does not appreciate that joke. So when we see these 3 ribs sticking out of its mouth, and he's given the power to go out and devour. So there were 3 major conquests of the Medo-Persian Empire. And the first one, they conquered Babylon in 539 BC. And then they conquered Lydia. And Lydia is modern-day Turkey on the Mediterranean there. It would later go on to be the crown of the Ottoman Empire, which is where Constantinople would be in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. So it's always been because it's a huge peninsula, it's always been very rich, very powerful. But it wasn't an empire, but it was a very rich kingdom because it was on the Mediterranean, had all that coastline. The next one would be Egypt. In 525 BC, they conquered the Egyptian Empire. So this huge bear, the reason it's a bear is, number one, it's powerful. It's a very powerful empire. It devours a lot of kingdoms, not just small kingdoms. Lydia, like we said, was the smallest of those kingdoms, but it had been a kingdom for 600 years. Now, America's only been a kingdom for about 250 years, almost 250 years, not quite 250 years. So, we're just still a drop in the bucket to how long Lydia had been its own governed body. And so it joined together a large nation and 2 empires under its roof. But it did it in a very slow and lumbering way. They didn't take off and spread real fast. So although they were very powerful and they did have a large empire, at that point in time, they were the largest empire that area of the world had ever known. Like I said, they joined together 2 other empires, their own country and another large country. But also it's shown in this size of the bear because these guys, when they came to town, they didn't just get as many people as they could and go in the army. They would hire foreign mercenaries. They would do anything they could. As a matter of fact, Xerxes, who was the emperor in the Medo-Persian Empire in 580 BC, marched on Greece. And when he did, historians say, and some people will argue and say that this number is kind of inflated, and maybe it wasn't quite this many. But the ancient historians say that he marched on Greece with 2.5 million troops, and that's not counting his navy. 2.5 million troops. I mean, that is a lot of people when you think about the ancient systems of how you supplied your troops and what you had to do just to feed these people. And I mean, you get an army that size together. Think about disease and everything else that wipes people out. And just to be able to mobilize a 2.5 million person army. This nation, they were big, they were powerful. And when they came to town, you knew it. That's why they are the bear. So beast number 3 is the Greek Empire. And so here we have a leopard and wings. So that is all about the swiftness of the Greek Empire. Alexander the Great. These guys are the Ferrari of ancient armies. They come in, they have bronze uniforms on, polished brass. They look slick. They've got the fancy helmets on, and they move fast. Alexander the Great, after his father died and left him the Macedonian country, he started with a small country that was broke. His father had fought several wars, and they were basically a broke nation. They were kind of like America. They were so far in debt, they couldn't see their way out. Alexander inherited a broke country with that had a king that was his father. There was a great military strategist, though. So in the 10 years that Alexander, after he inherits the kingdom, he conquers all of the Medo-Persian Empire. In 10 years.
The whole bear.
The whole bear. He conquers everything. As a matter of fact, his kingdom goes from northern Africa all the way out to Libya, and then goes all the way to Pakistan. The only reason that he did not cross over into India is that, well, there were two reasons. One, he didn't see it as a major kingdom to conquer. In India, apparently at that time, and I've not done a lot of studying on this, but apparently there wasn't a large dynasty there. There was no glory. It was kind of a tribal system or so. I may be totally wrong, but he just didn't see it as a huge conquest of a nation. There wasn't anything in there for him. But on top of that, there was the fact that his men were battle weary from 10 years of war, and they just wanted to go home. So Alexander quits after 10 years, and it's only because he stopped did he not conquer more land. Now, of course, the four heads there, the four heads are a symbol of his four generals that are going to take over, because Alexander does die. Most historians feel like he died of malaria over in the Far East. In his kingdom, he has no heir because Alexander leads I guess you'd say, alternate lifestyle, and is never married. And so his four generals claim the throne, and there's kind of I guess you'd say that it's just legend that Alexander's last words were, when they asked him, so who will take the crown? And his last words were, whoever's the strongest. So he kind of left that in turmoil, and we'll read later about that nation splitting up and what happens then. We'll really get into that kind of in Daniel chapter 11. So the fourth beast. The fourth beast, of course, is the Roman Empire. And unlike the other empires that are named in this chapter, well, everybody else, we're going to see that Babylon is named, of course, in the first couple of chapters. The Medes and the Persians, they're named in the next chapter. And also we see them in chapter 5. We'll see them taking over the Babylonian Empire, just as Daniel predicted. And we'll hear Greece called out by name. So we'll hear the first, second, third later on in Daniel. We'll hear all of those empires named. Now, Rome is not named. And there's a reason why he doesn't name Rome. It's because if God would have told him, Daniel, the fourth empire is going to be Rome, Daniel would have went, who? What? Because Rome at this point in time was not a world power. Now, so we see that Daniel was in Babylon between like 605 BC and 535 BC is what historians tell us. Now, Rome was founded in 753 BC. So Rome was a city at this point in time, but it was not a particularly profitable city. It wasn't a grand city. There was nothing too spectacular about it. It was just a city that was in the Italian peninsula. It did not even become a nation or a republic until 509 BC. And it wasn't until 266 BC that Rome managed to grow and become the capital, or Rome managed to grow and become the controller of the peninsula of Italy. So at that point in time, they weren't a regional power. If you just weren't from the Mediterranean area and over there, you wouldn't have known who Rome was. Very few people cared or knew who Rome was at this point in time. So that's the reason why it's not named. Remember, this, as much as we love to think that everything is all about us, like what's going on in 2020, and we read the Bible and everything is about 2020 right now, you know, it's just not. Remember that this is written to a Jewish man who's concerned about the Jewish nation. And so we're getting information about what's going to happen in and around them. I've got a friend who I like to tell him, I believe in the rapture, but every verse in the Bible is not about the rapture, okay? There's a lot of things in prophecy that do not concern the rapture. We will get into that, you know, in chapters to come here. So, let's see, lost my place here. This beast is exceptionally cruel. And for a culture that prided itself on being civilized, they didn't actually have their own culture, but they did bring in a whole lot of the Greeks. They felt like the Greek culture was something to be upheld and striven for. So they kind of adopted the Greek culture as their own, and they instituted what they called Pax Romana. And that was the Roman peace. So they had their Rome system where we get the old saying, all roads lead to Rome. And because they instituted that so that they could feed their armies, you know, get back and forth to their territories. They also allowed them to spread their armies out and keep down revolts and uprisings, except for in this one little place that they like to call Palestine, and that was a bunch of troublemakers there. So for a culture that felt like they epitomized what it was to be sophisticated. You know, everyone else to them, they felt like when they went to Northern Europe and into continental Europe, they said that when they fought the Gauls and that they were, or the Germanic peoples or the people in Britain, that they always referred to them as the barbarians. Even when we read about the barbarians who take over Rome later on, we find out they're not really like Conan the Barbarian like we think about. They really have a culture and a civilization. They just weren't Romans. So everybody who wasn't Roman was a barbarian. Just like when we read the Bible, everybody who is not a Jew is a Gentile. All right. So they perfected cruelty, actually. Now, they did not invent crucifixion, for example. That was invented before them. Actually, the Medo-Persian Empire would crucify. They practiced crucifixion. They did not use the crossbeam. Theirs was more of a, we'll nail people up on a tree like this and let them suffocate. But the crossbeam crucifixion or the X-beam crucifixion that Rome used, that didn't come along until the Roman Empire. Rome basically spent 500 years perfecting the crucifixion. There's times that we read that General Varus, and if I pronounce that wrong, forgive me, crucified 2,000 Jews at once. So this is the Latin. We get the term excruciating. From a Latin phrase that means from the cross. So anytime you hear excruciating, there's a Latin phrase that evolved during the Roman Empire that means from the cross, and it was excruciating. So this beast is unlike any of the others. It's cruel. It's not really interested in. There were a lot of the other civilizations, the Medo-Persians, for instance, that when Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian would come in and they would take over a territory like Babylon, they were almost seen as liberators. If you'll read in the Old Testament, you'll see that Isaiah prophesies that when Cyrus arises as king of the foreign nation, that he will send the Jewish people home, which he does. If you read Nehemiah, you'll hear him talk about Cyrus sending people home. Rome was not like this. They wanted to feed Rome. That was their top priority. Everything else was, okay, you take our gods, you assimilate to us, you become like us, or else. Let's see here. So the 10 horns that we see, I really can't find anything in history that would associate these with being current or past rulers. There are some people that would argue that these are 10 kings that already have been. But there's really nothing in the closest thing I can find of these 10 kings would be that there were 10 emperors of Rome, from Nero to Diocletian, that did persecute the church. But the major hang up with that is that the Bible kind of describes these. Number one, it says that they will come up.
So you think it's not happened yet?
Yeah. These 10, I would say that these 10 here begin the future, just like when we looked at the 10 toes on the statue, that these are in the future. And it's because Daniel says that they will be coming, that they will rise up from this. So they're not an initial part of this beast. Daniel says later they will rise up. And then if you think about it, all 10 of them have to be ruling at one time, because 3 of them are jerked up by the little horn. So grant on that would be where I would say that we're talking about the new and revived Roman Empire. Now, these correlate to the toes that are half iron and half clay that we see in chapter 2. And the more I study on this and the more I read on this, this could mean that because there's that mixture there, there could be some type of mixture of kingdoms that, now this is purely speculation, just speculation. Don't take it any farther. It only goes, the authority of this only goes to the end of my chin, and then it runs out of authority. So just thinking it could be nations that were historically, their landmass was in the Roman Empire, and some of them may have not been historically associated with the Roman Empire, because they do talk about a mingling there that doesn't stick. And these 3 that are ripped up could be part of the ones that don't stick in the empire. That's just my guess. But this beast definitely has similarities with the one that John saw in Revelation chapter 13, and we're going to get more into that next week. But so I encourage you to go to Revelation chapter 13 and kind of look at that beast there that rises out of the sea, because we'll be making kind of a comparison to those. Now, I did have a friend this last week that said, hey, I was kind of talking about, about some prophecy and things, and the things that me and you were talking about were a little different, and my sources here said this, and my sources here this. Let me say this, that, part of this unfulfilled prophecy, it's easy to look back on the first 3 beasts here and say, this is what happened. It's pretty hard to, when we compare secular history to what the Bible says, it's pretty hard to miss those 3. When we get into some of the symbolism and stuff, remember that the Bible is infallible. I'm not. So if you have a favorite commentator that explains things better, then that's great. If they have a different theory about some minor part, because I'll just be honest with you, it's like me and my friend talked about. None of what we're talking about, none of anything that we will speculate about will change salvation. None of this changes back here, this section that we're going to get more into next week about God on his throne and the Son of Man coming in power and glory. None of the things that we've speculated on, like those 10 kingdoms, have anything to do with salvation. I'm utterly sure of the things that I speak about when they come to that. I won't even speculate on things that would affect salvation. So, like I said, if you've got a commentator that says something better, and actually if you've got somebody that has a better argument than me, call me and let me know about it. I'd love to hear it. I don't know everything. I don't pretend to, and I love to learn too. So if you've got any better evidence, just let me know. So I'll turn the camera off here and we'll get some discussion. And my died.